Hello everyone, welcome to our Capstone project presentation. My name is Giovanna.
And I am Joanna.
And as you can see on the screen, we have provided our Capstone project title, A Correlational Study of Caregivers' Perception of Child's Mental Health and Caregivers' Behavioral Response Toward Children. Alright guys, so childhood mental illness is an important and vital public health issue in our country, as it creates a great impact in families, children, and communities across the United States. According to the National Research Council and Institute of Medicine, it is reported that approximately 13 to 20% of children in the United States suffer with a mental disorder in any given year. This obviously raises a concern in parental stress, burden, and anxiety attributed to children's mental illness, as it may lead to a series of detrimental outcomes such as aggression, child maltreatment, and abuse. It is crucial and important for primary caregivers of children with mental health illness to be proactive and to receive appropriate mental health services for their children as early as possible. Also, it is just as important that caregivers are aware of their own perceptions, their views, and or biases against their children's mental health. Alright guys, so on the screen you can see our research proposal. Is there a correlation between how a caregiver perceives the severity level of a child's mental health condition and the caregiver's attitude and behavior towards their child? We have two hypotheses. The first hypothesis includes parents who perceive having a child with severe mental health conditions are at risk of developing negative temperament, burden, and aggression, emotional, verbal, or physical, towards their child. The second hypothesis includes parents of children diagnosed with more than one mental health disorder in categories of ADHD, depression, anxiety, and or autism are at risk of developing aggression towards their children.
So now looking at the major points in our literature review. When looking at the effects of children's mental health condition as well as parental burden, according to one study, 4.5% of parents in the study perceive burden regardless of having a child with a diagnosis or impairment. This percentage refers to the burden due to the typically developing population of children. However, the percentage quadruples to 17% perceived burden for parents with children who have both a diagnosis and impairment. A child's total number of symptoms was the strongest predictor that influenced any perceived burden, and second to that was the child's functional impairment. What was interesting was that children diagnosed with depression or anxiety disorder had parents who perceived less burdensome than parents of children with other mental health disorders. Then when looking at the parents and child's relationship in relation to attachment theory, the manner in which a parent handles stressful situation is dependent on the type of attachment a parent has with his or her child. A few studies have suggested that attachment has the capacity to predict caregivers' behaviors above and beyond contextual factors, including the severity of a child's symptom and the extent of demands required in caregiving. So what sort of maltreatments are common? The 6 types of maltreatment subcategories include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect, such as failure to supervise, as well as educational maltreatment. In examining multiple studies across all severity levels of abuse, females generally reported higher physical abuse than male. Comparing the U.S. with other countries like Japan, there has been a decreasing number of child abuse reported. However, the severity level of physical abuse that resulted in serious hospitalization injuries for those under 18, including those under the age of 1, has increased. And lastly, looking at children with neurological disorders, specifically ADHD and autism, in a study that provided both parents and teachers a stress index measure, study found that ratings indicated that behavioral problems are strongly associated with stress. Next, we want to share with you our method approach. The sample size was collected through the National Survey of Children's Health 2013, which consisted of a filtered data set sample of 152 participants, which is the data sample for this particular study that we're doing. The targeted population in this study consisted of English-speaking parents from California, both mothers and fathers, whether they are biological, step, adoptive, or foster parents, of children between the ages of 6 through 17 years old, and all children have been identified by their parents as individuals with one or more of the following difficulties, either emotional, concentration, behavioral, and/or difficulty getting along with others. As you can see, our sample size decreased drastically, and the major source of excursion was due to that last portion of being identified with either emotional, concentration, behavioral, or difficulty getting along with others.
All right, guys, so moving on to the dependent and independent sections of our study. We did have two hypotheses. So for the first hypothesis, the independent variable in the study is the parent's perception of the child's level of severity in his or her mental health conditions, while the dependent variable is the temperament and level of aggression towards their child. The independent variable for the second hypothesis is the number of diagnoses of mental health conditions, for example, ADHD, depression, anxiety, and/or autism, while the dependent variable is the level of aggression towards their children. Severity of a child's mental health condition is considered as one of our independent variables, as mentioned earlier, and includes responses at the ordinal level of measurement, such as mild, moderate, and severe. The number of diagnoses of mental health conditions for children includes 4 levels: no diagnosis, 1 diagnosis, or more than 2 diagnoses. Our dependent variable for both hypotheses includes caregivers' aggression based on how angry parents feel towards their children, how often they argued with their children, and how often they hit their children within the past month.